So I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea about what interdisciplinarity is by going through an example, and also kind of this is a sample of the things that we talk about in the course that I teach for the BASc program, Qualitative and Quantitative Methods for Interdisciplinary Research, Parts 1 and 2. So here's a sample of like what you'll have in class, as well as an argument for a description of what is interdisciplinary research and an argument for why we should be doing it, right? So just a little, excuse me, a little bit about me. So I'm from the United States originally, in particular San Antonio. I got my PhD at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. I've lived in Hong Kong for over 10 years now. I'm a lecturer in the Faculty of Arts, and I am the course coordinator for, if you're in the BASc program, you'll have 2 courses with me, semester 1 and or term, first term and second term of first year. I teach this course with 2 other team members. That's with Dr. Wong and Dr. Waterspoon. And Andrew is a lecturer in the Faculty of Social Science. So I'm from Arts. Andrew is from the Social Sciences, and he's a postdoctoral fellow in the Academy for Leadership and Teacher Education. So quality educators. Tim is in the Faculty of Science. So we have 1 lecturer from Arts, 1 from Social Science, 1 from Science. And he won the Faculty of Science Excellent Teaching Assistant Award for outstanding work. So we've got great teachers and me as well. And so this is the team that teaches your first exposure to the BASc program when you show up at the university, right? So interdisciplinarity, HKU currently is its sort of mission statement at the moment is the 3+1 I's: internationalization, innovation, interdisciplinarity, converging towards impact, right? So it's clear that it's important to the university. Also, if you look at these charts and you can see the sort of green line is the important one, reference in articles to other disciplines in the natural sciences and the social sciences, as you can see, has been going up over time, right? So interdisciplinarity is on the rise. It's an important focus of Hong Kong University. But then here's the question, well, what is it, right? All right, so I want to give you one example, right, of an interdisciplinary research project, research program that's really been bearing lots of interesting, fruitful work. So let's start by just talking about thought experiments. So a thought experiment consists of an imagined case described in a narrative. And so we're asked to think about the consequences of these cases. What would be true in the case beyond what's merely described in the case? So I'll give you an example. Right. Our judgments about these consequences are typically used to test philosophical claims or theories, or it could be scientific claims as well. But I'm going to focus on, so I'm a philosopher by training. I have my PhD in philosophy. So I'm going to focus on philosophy today. All right. So here's a philosophical claim. It's morally okay to kill 1 person if doing so saves many more people, right? So this is a common sort of view. And then here's a vivid sort of thought experiment that's supposed to tease out whether we agree with this philosophical claim, right? So imagine you're driving a trolley around along a set of train tracks. So a trolley, streetcar, ding ding, the electrified train that runs on the street. There's I think I missed a slide where it says there's some work. So you notice that ahead of you there are 5 workers working on the tracks, and they won't be able to get out of the way if you keep driving the trolley down. There's no one for them to nowhere for them to go. If the train keeps going, they'll be hit and they will die. Unfortunately, your brakes have failed. So you can't stop the trolley. You can't put on the brakes, and it's just on these tracks, right? However, there's a side track coming up, and you can divert onto the side track. Unfortunately, there's a worker down on the side of the track. And if you divert to that track, you will kill that guy. So the question is it okay for you to turn the trolley, killing the single worker? And what you need to notice that's different in this case is one course of action involves doing something that involves you killing a person. You take an action that results in that person dying. The other option, do nothing, is nothing that you have done results in these people being killed. They do die, right? But you just let them die because of the situation. You didn't kill them. It was a runaway trolley that you had no control over. Different people have given different answers to this question, right? Some people say it's okay to kill the one. Some people say killing is never right, so you should do nothing. So the philosophical claim, is it morally okay to kill one person if doing so saves many more people? Well, here's a thought experiment, and how you answer that thought experiment suggests which side of the philosophical claim that you'll be on. All right. So that's just an introduction to what's a thought experiment, right? Some people have thought that this is how philosophy works. Right, so this is the method of philosophy. You come up with a philosophical theory, and how do you test whether that theory is true? Well, you test it with thought experiments, right? The theory makes predictions. It says, well, the theory says it's okay to kill one to save a greater number. And so you come up with an example and you say, well, what do people think about this case? So you test the predictions of the philosophical theory with the thought experiments. And then if people say, well, no, I don't agree that you can kill the one person in this case, then you revise the theory and then repeat the process, right? So philosophy is kind of like science, but you don't test it by doing actual experiments. You test it by doing thought experiments, right? That's just one way some people have thought philosophy works. All right. So now I want to introduce you to a different type of philosophy experiment, experimental philosophy. All right. So here's how philosophers have been doing it. They come up with their theory, then they come up with a thought experiment that will test the theory. Then they decide what they would do in the thought experiment, and then they decide whether that confirms or disconfirms their theory. But why should philosophers trust their own judgments of the cases that they consider? Right? Could it be possible that philosophers' judgments differ from the judgments of non-philosophers, or that different groups, say different cultures, different genders, people from different walks of life, different age groups, would have different judgments about the same cases? So there's this newly invented field of philosophy called experimental philosophy that was invented by this fellow here, Josh Knobe. So the story is he went to Central Park in New York City, and he just started giving people philosophical thought experiments and asking them what they thought about it. So here was Josh's particular experiment that he did. So it goes as follows. The CEO of a company is sitting in his office when his vice president of research and development comes in and says, "We are thinking of starting a new program. It will help us increase profits, but it will also harm the environment." The CEO responds that he doesn't care about harming the environment, and he just wants to make as much profit as possible. The program is carried out, profits are made, and the environment is harmed. And then Josh asked them, did the CEO intentionally harm the environment, right? The harm to the environment was a side effect of what he did, which was increase profits. One of the side effects or externalities was the harm to the environment. And there's a question, did you intentionally do the harm to the environment? I'll let you think for yourself whether you think he intentionally harmed them or not. But then what Josh did was something interesting. He asked half of the people this question after giving them that story. Then he asked the other half of the people the following question. It's the same story, but instead it has helped the environment instead of harm. So the CEO is sitting in his office, his vice president of R&D comes in, he says, we want to start a new program, it will increase profits, but it will also help the environment. And the CEO responds, I don't care about helping the environment, I just want as much profit as possible. The program's carried out, profits are made, and the environment is helped. Did the CEO intentionally blank the environment, right? So these two cases, help or harm. It turns out if you say harm, 82% think that yes, the CEO intentionally harmed the environment in that story. But if you just change the case with one word and say help, only 23% of the people agree that the CEO intentionally helps the environment, right? So it looks like the effect that Knobe discovered seems to be that our judgments of intentionality depend on whether the externality is negative or whether it's positive. If the side effects of my actions are positive, of my intentional actions are positive, then I didn't intentionally do the side effects. But if the side effects of my intentional actions are negative, then I did intentionally do the side effects. And that's a really interesting finding, given that that's not how normally philosophers have thought of intentionality, right? So this was an interesting discovery, but hopefully you guys in the audience are thinking, well, look, this isn't how science works. You don't do science by going to Central Park and just talking with strangers. That's very unsystematic and unscientific, right? So there are tools for getting appropriate representative samples in your survey size, and there are tools for testing the significance of results and the size of effects. But the problem is philosophy programs don't teach any of those tools. Like I have a PhD in philosophy and I don't know how to do a t-test, right? I have a PhD in philosophy and I don't know how to go about acquiring a representative sample in order to do an experiment on them, right? So it seems as though what is needed is for philosophers to join forces with psychologists who have the tools for analyzing data and the skill set for writing effective non-biased survey questions that can be used. So psychologists are already versed in these sort of the methods of doing these experimental manipulations with surveys and designing the surveys so that they're not biased, and then analyzing the data. And so what's grown up is this field of experimental philosophy, where philosophers who are traditionally non-experimentalists team up with experimental researchers who have the tools and the methods and the know-how to do it, to help try to find out about philosophically relevant concepts and how they're deployed, but looking at how non-philosophers use those concepts instead of just assuming that philosophers are the best judges of what's going on in a thought experiment that we've covered, right? So there's this interdisciplinary collaboration between traditional experimentalists and philosophers in order to try to do some of this experimental philosophy that was initially invented just by a philosopher asking people questions in Central Park. But of course, that's not scientific. So in order to make it into a scientific project that can give us answers about things, it required this interdisciplinary team up. So what is interdisciplinary research? It's a mode of research by teams or individuals that integrates information, data, techniques, tools, perspectives, concepts, and/or theories from two or more disciplines or bodies of specialized knowledge to advance fundamental understanding or to solve problems whose solutions are beyond the scope of a single discipline or field of research practice. So now experimental philosophy is a big rolling sort of research program. There's lots of different research projects that are occurring under that umbrella. And I just want to give you one final example before we have our Q&A time, because I think it's how experimental philosophy can uncover perhaps ancient biases that exist within philosophy, and how we can improve philosophy through engaging in this program, right? So this is a question I asked before, but now I want to return to it. Could it be possible that different groups, that is, for instance, different cultures or people who are different genders, have different judgments about these thought experiments, right? And it turns out that the experimental evidence suggests that this is the case. So here's one more thought experiment. So bear with me. Number 3. So Peter is in his locked apartment and is reading in bed. He decides to have a shower. He puts his book down on the coffee table, and then he takes off his watch and puts it on the coffee table. And then he goes into the bathroom. Okay. So here's his watch. It's down on the coffee table. He has a nice watch. So as Peter's shower begins, so he's in the shower, water hits him. A burglar silently breaks into Peter's apartment. The burglar takes Peter's watch, but in its place, he leaves a cheap plastic watch. And then he leaves. Peter has only been in the shower for 2 minutes, and he did not hear the burglar. He didn't hear anything unusual. Does Peter really know that there is a watch on the table, or does he only believe it? It's correct that there is a watch on the table because the burglar left a cheap plastic watch in place of his fancy watch. So Peter believes that there's a watch on the table, and the question is, does he really know that there's a watch on the table, or does he only believe it? Traditionally, philosophers have thought that Peter does not know, right, that there's a watch, even though he has a reason to believe that there's a watch. He does believe that there's a watch, and it's true that there's a watch there. He doesn't know because the reason he has for believing it, namely that he put the watch down there, is not the reason why his belief is true, because the watch that is on there was left by the burglar, not by him. All right, you don't really have to understand the case to understand the results. So here's the results. Does he really know? Women say yes. So if you look at the very left-hand chart here, this is when you gave people this case. Women say yes at around 76%. Men are down at 43%. So men think he doesn't know. Women think he does know, right? And same, they gave the same case again, but so on the right-hand side is with the watch and the book. They gave the case again with a woman going into the shower and she puts a ring down on the dresser. But in both cases, women thought that the person in the shower did know that the thing was on the table, and men thought that he didn't know, he just believed. And so that's an interesting finding. We find out that there's this gender difference in judgments about the thought experiment, right? And here's an interesting fact. Look at the 4th column down here that says percentage. This is the percentage of women faculty members at the top philosophy programs in the United States. 17%, 15%, 17%, 12% is not very high, right? And so Buckwalter and Stitch in their 2013 article on the basis of this experiment and 7 other experiments that showed clear differences between how women respond to the thought experiments and how men respond to the thought experiments, showing that they respond in different ways. Well, they hypothesize that women are driven away from philosophy because they take the philosophy classes, their philosophy professors who are men say, here's what's happening, here's a thought experiment, and here's the right answer, here's what's going on. And the women say, well, that's not what's going on. And they think that they just don't understand the philosophy. And so they aren't cut out for it and are driven away from philosophy. Because so far, the right answers have always been thought to be, well, the ones that the men were judging to be true in the thought experiment. And the men just assumed that everybody judged the same way. Men and women would all consider the experiment and come up with the same solution. But it turns out that when we actually do the experimental philosophy, there are differences between groups. And we've seen it's not just men and women, but experimental philosophy has shown that there are differences in judgments between, say, East Asian participants in the research and Western participants, differences between people of different social classes, differences between people of different political beliefs. And so this is really important because philosophy has so far relied on a kind of armchair method where we just sit around and we think about things and then come to the correct philosophical answer. But if different people sitting around thinking about them would come to different answers, then it seems as though we shouldn't assume that like we're in a privileged position and then just I myself sitting down and thinking about it, that I will come to the correct answer if other people thinking about it would have come to different answers, right? So in conclusion, interdisciplinary research is on the rise. I showed you those charts at the beginning. Over the decades, it keeps increasing. And it's important to HKU in particular. This is research that combines the methods or theories of two or more disciplines to solve problems that can't otherwise be solved by each separately. Experimental philosophy is a recent and fruitful instance of interdisciplinary research combining the theories and thought experiments of philosophy with the data collection and analysis tools of psychology. BASc 1001 and 1002 are methods and methodology courses for interdisciplinary research, which are taught by an interdisciplinary team of me from the arts and a social scientist and a hard scientist. So if you get in the program, you'll take this course of study, or you'll have among your required courses will be a class where, among other things, I talk about things like this. I talk about interdisciplinarity, I talk about instances of interdisciplinarity, and I talk about why it's important and why we should pursue these sorts of things, right? So this is just a sample of the sorts of things that we talk about in my class, right? All right, so I will hand it back over to Abel or whoever is going to run the next section.